Yeah, I'm kind of blacklisted. I haven't gotten a studio job in 15 years. It was just absurd.
You know, I had a whole bunch of weird paranoid suspicions about what the hell was going on because there was a lot of stuff I couldn't understand.
Right.
It does rip your life to pieces.
Does it?
If you'll let it.
Yeah.
You have to make a deal with everyone else, and it's almost unspoken that you are going to be fucked over at some point.
It's a dark institution in a lot of ways because it's history.
It isn't what it purports to be anymore. It's moved away from what it was intended to be and what it is.
It's an open secret in Hollywood. These people have their own religious and spiritual teachings and their own social and moral frameworks. They have their sacred texts. They are sick, believe me. And they couldn't be more at odds with what America stands for.
I think it all starts with, like, you got to look at yourself a lot. And it's like, you know, how do you get meaning out of this existence? And what's it all about? So it's a search in that direction. And I think the search, you might never get to the end of it, but I think the very act of searching yields some kind of good fruit.
I drove a buddy of mine to an audition for this film, and they saw me in the office and they said, "Whoa, you're a freak. We might need freaks in this film." And so they took Polaroids of me, slapped them on the board, and they said, "Come back in 3 weeks when you heal up." So I came back in 3 weeks and they said, "Yes." And I said, "I'm here." And they said, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "I'm that guy on the board." And they said, "Oh, interesting. Go in and talk to the man." I went in and told him a joke and he said, "You got the part." Like that. It was really, It was weird.
Mel Gibson's gravel-lined voice cuts through the hum of an off-camera crew, and you can almost feel the temperature drop. Val wouldn't bend, he says, leaning back in the worn leather chair, knuckles drumming the armrest like distant thunder. They needed him compliant, silent, willing to play the game. He refused, and that's when the shutters came down. It sounds like a Hollywood urban legend, one of those whispered backlot tales that swell every time a studio gate clanks shut at midnight. But this isn't tabloid fan fiction. It's the hard-edged confession of a man who's spent 3 decades dancing along the razor wire that separates blockbuster royalty from permanent exile. Gibson knows the taste of banishment, and he's convinced the exact same machinery that chewed him up didn't just bruise Val Kilmer's career, it erased him, frame by frame, precisely because Kilmer wouldn't sign away the last fragile sliver of his soul. Kilmer's ascent to stardom looked effortless from the outside. In 1984, he swaggered onto the screen in Top Secret, barely old enough to buy a drink, but already dripping the sort of charisma agents bill by the ounce. Barely a year later, he lit the afterburners in Top Gun, and by 1991, he had liquefied into Jim Morrison in The Doors, a performance so hypnotic even die-hard fans did a double-take at vintage concert footage. When Tombstone hit in '93, his Doc Holliday became instant folklore. Slick, dangerous, and drenched in sweat-soaked sarcasm. Then came the cape and cowl of Batman Forever in '95, solidifying him as the face of $90 million tentpoles. Each role felt like an exclamation mark on the promise everyone made when he left Juilliard as its youngest accepted student. This kid is a comet. Except comets burn out when the vacuum stops feeding them, and by the time Batman and Robin entered pre-production, Kilmer was gone, replaced without so much as a press release eulogy. No franchise handshake, no farewell interview, just a sudden, yawning silence. It was so abrupt, gossip rags assumed he must have detonated on set, thrown fists at a producer, demanded a trailer bigger than the soundstage. Hollywood loves the tantrum myth because it absolves the system. Difficult, they say, and the conversation ends. For years, that label clung to Val like duct tape. Director Joel Schumacher even flamethrowered it into public view, calling him psychotic and praying he'd never be forced to direct him again. Harsh words. But Hollywood is an ecosystem famous for tolerating volcanic egos when they print money. Christian Bale melted down on set and still took home Oscars. Alec Baldwin berated crew members between takes and kept collecting paydays. Tom Cruise launched at journalists and retained every blockbuster franchise on his resume. So why did Val vanish, while others simply issued apologies and resumed their press tours? Gibson provides a different map, one that starts not with an angry star, but with a closed-door meeting most people never hear about. There's always a dinner, he says. A quiet, candlelit table with someone who doesn't introduce themselves by title. They gauge your pressure points: greed, vanity, fear. Then they offer shortcuts, roles that skip auditions, back-end points that dwarf your salary, invitations to private estates where the real networking happens. There's a toll. There's always a toll. Say yes, and doors glide open like magic. Say no, and those doors seal so tight you start wondering if they ever existed at all. Gibson claims Kilmer got that invitation somewhere between wrapping Heat and suiting up in Batman. According to Mel, Val walked out. No shouting, no middle finger, just an artist with enough self-worth to recognize a gilded cage before the bars snapped shut. And that, Gibson insists, is when the Whisper campaign began. They don't call the trades and announce a blacklist, he says. They leak stories about temper. They nudge casting directors towards smoother options. They quietly drop you from studio shortlists. It's the soft kill. You're alive, but you starve. Look at the timeline, and Gibson's theory starts casting shadows on the wall. Between 1996 and 1999, a cluster of once untouchable stars plunged into the same strange limbo. Wesley Snipes faced tax charges after questioning why his accounting paperwork never matched his pay stubs. Brendan Fraser publicly accused a powerful awards executive of inappropriate conduct and almost immediately found himself auditioning for guest spots on cable TV. Mel himself financed The Passion of the Christ out of pocket after every major distributor ghosted him. And then there's Kilmer, stepping out of blockbuster command and into the vast wilderness of direct-to-video genre curiosities. Some call it coincidence. Gibson calls it pattern recognition. He points to 1999 as the hinge year. Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut wrapped, bristling with imagery of masked elites and secret gatherings. Then Kubrick died before approving the final cut. Roughly the same season, flight logs for a certain Caribbean island billionaire began circulating through FBI backrooms. You can argue context forever, Gibson says, voice dipping to a near growl. But you can't ignore gravity when a dozen apples fall from the same tree at once. Kilmer himself fueled speculation when, in a rare sit-down, he confessed he hadn't booked a proper studio gig in 15 years. Blacklisted? The interviewer asked. Val's laugh sounded more like a wince. Not in a way, he replied. You are. He'd complained about script quality, about professionalism, about pay gaps, but nothing that should exile him completely. Yet, every time a blockbuster script circled his agent's desk, the phone fell silent after page one. Studios chose safer bets, younger faces, actors less likely to question a late-night memo rewriting their character into a marketing slogan. That exile didn't just drain his bank account, it hacked away at the essence he'd spent decades shaping. Kilmer's documentary Val is a mosaic of camcorder footage, set diaries, and backstage confessions that reveal a man archiving his own erasure in real time. He films premieres, rehearsals, hospital visits, half-empty auditoriums where he performs one-man Shakespeare shows just to feed the itch of creativity. I keep the camera rolling, he tells his son at one point, because Hollywood sure won't. Gibson sees the doc as more than memoir. It's evidence, he insists. Val knew what was happening. The tape doesn't lie. He rattles off moments, a studio executive praising his performance off the record, but refusing to attach him to the sequel for optics. A magazine interviewer instructed to skip questions about a certain film's canceled release. An agent's cryptic warning to stop poking the bear or you'll never work again. Each fragment alone is meaningless. Together, they outline a corporate perimeter fence. And then there's the island. Gibson refuses to speak its owner's name, calls him the pilot instead. He says Kilmer received one of those infamous invites and politely declined. After that, Mel shrugs. Scripts vanished overnight. Coincidence maybe, but coincidences rarely travel in packs. The blacklist didn't silence Kilmer immediately. It just rerouted him. He poured himself into stage plays, art installations, and a Mark Twain traveling show that paid more in applause than in dollars. He also became increasingly spiritual, even messianic, in interviews, talking about gratitude, humility, the need to forgive. Some critics mocked the New Age vibe, but Gibson suggests it was less hippie babble and more survival strategy. When the doors close, you either break your knuckles pounding or you turn inward and seek a window. Val chose the window. While Kilmer meditated, Gibson battled. He railed against a system he called morally bankrupt, drawing ire from press outlets that once toasted him as their golden boy. When he publicly supported Sound of Freedom, a low-budget thriller about rescuing trafficked children, mainstream reviewers rolled their eyes, branding it conspiracy bait. The film still sledged its way to a $100 million haul with grassroots word-of-mouth alone, but the silence from traditional award bodies was deafening. Gibson took that snub personally and, in private conversations, kept citing Val's story as proof the gatekeepers value compliance over art. By 2020, Kilmer's throat cancer had stolen his voice, his signature raspy timbre replaced by a faint electronic whisper through a voice box. Yet, when producers of Top Gun Maverick called, he said yes immediately, even knowing every line would be stitched from AI math and old recordings. Friends on set later said the emotional toll was brutal, every take a reminder of what the industry took from him. But he finished the scene, hugged Tom Cruise, and retreated into the quiet again. Then, on April 1st, came the headline nobody wanted. Val Kilmer, 65, found unresponsive in his Los Angeles home. The early report cited pneumonia complications. Old fans flooded social feeds with crying emojis. Cynics whispered about convenient Hollywood illnesses. Months later, a coroner's summary leaked malnutrition, lingering infections, surgical wounds that never healed, and a cocktail of painkillers strong enough to dull a small elephant. Nothing screamed sabotage. Everything whispered neglect. He'd slipped through the cracks of an industry that once paraded him like a prized stallion. Gibson's response was swift and haunting. At a private memorial, he took the podium and spoke without notes. According to witnesses, he spent 5 minutes praising Val's artistry, then another 10 scorching the industry that let him wither in plain sight. He stopped just short of naming names, but made his accusation explicit. They punished a man for refusing to kneel, then washed their hands while he bled in silence. Camera phones weren't allowed inside, but the quote spread like wildfire among agents' dinner tables and green room whispers. It begs a brutal question. What does selling your soul look like in practical terms? Gibson hints it starts with small compromises, accepting a rewrite that inserts product placement, overlooking a producer's creepy joke, attending a party where phones are confiscated at the door. Each concession is a chip off the spirit. Do it enough, and you're lighter, malleable, easier to guide. Kilmer, by all accounts, kept clutching those chips until his palms splintered. Hollywood noticed, and the phone stopped ringing. The blacklisting theory remains unproven, because that's how blacklists work. They leave no fingerprints, only cold shoulders. But follow the ripples and the image clarifies. Decades-long careers stalling the moment they question the wrong handshake, pet projects buried in vaults after studio mergers, auteurs forced to self-finance because executives can't find an audience for stories already proven to print money. Look past the TMZ glare, and you'll spot the pattern. Silence, exile, then a polite industry funeral wrapped in press-friendly buzzwords like creative differences or personal hiatus. Gibson has learned to live with exile by building his own island of financiers and independent distributors. Kilmer chose introspection and art house detours. Both paths share a blunt morale. If you refuse the unspoken oath, you'd better pack endurance. And you'd better make peace with obscurity, because studio amnesia can feel eternal. In the final analysis, Kilmer's disappearance isn't a cautionary tale about anger issues or diva antics. It's a case study in what happens when a performer values integrity above access. He wasn't the first to be boxed out, just one of the rare few to admit it in public with a half smile and the shrug of a man who'd rather starve than kneel. And that smile scared the system more than any tantrum could. A tantrum can be appeased. Conviction, that's infectious. If one star walks away, others might follow. Gibson's warning lingers long after the interview lights click off. They still think they won, he says, eyes narrowing. They erased Val from the billboards, but not from our memory. Every time a new generation streams Tombstone or The Doors, they rediscover him. That's immortality no blacklist can extinguish. So next time you scroll a streaming menu and wonder why your favorite 90s icon vanished after topping the box office, remember the quiet dinner, the candlelight, the handshake that costs more than money. Remember Val Kilmer, who chose to preserve an uncorrupted version of himself even when the price was everything Hollywood had to offer. And remember Mel Gibson, still pounding on those sealed studio doors, not begging for entry but demanding someone answer for why they were locked in the first place. Because the reels may keep spinning, the sound stages may keep buzzing, but the secret towns behind those gates are built on the fragile silence of artists who finally decide their humanity is worth more than an opening weekend headline. Val Kilmer decided, Mel Gibson decided, how many others will before the shutters slam shut again?